usual nightmare family. In the summer of 1998, four college friends, Rachel, Alex, Tyler, and Jess, decided to go on a camping trip in the woods of Northern California. They had all grown up in the area and were familiar with the woods, having gone on many camping trips together in the past. Their plan was to hike to a remote area of the woods where they had never been before, set up camp, and spend a few days hiking, fishing, and enjoying the beauty of nature. They were all excited for the adventure ahead. They set off early in the morning, with backpacks full of supplies and camping gear. The hike was long and challenging, but they were all in good spirits, joking and laughing along the way. As the day wore on, they realized that they had gotten off the trail and were hopelessly lost. They tried to retrace their steps but couldn't seem to find their way back to the trail. Panic began to set in as they realized that they were running out of daylight and had no idea where they were. They decided to set up camp for the night and try to figure out their next move in the morning. They found a clearing and set up their tents, gathered some firewood, and started a fire. They cooked some food and tried to make the best of the situation. As the night wore on, they heard strange noises coming from the woods surrounding them. The sounds were unlike anything they had ever heard before. It was as if the very forest was alive and angry. They tried to ignore the sounds and stay quiet, hoping that they wouldn't draw any attention to themselves. But the noises grew louder and more intense, and the group knew that they were in serious danger. They suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream, followed by a loud crash. They jumped up, startled, and saw that something had knocked over their supplies and scattered them around the clearing. They could hear footsteps moving closer, crunching on the leaves and twigs on the ground. They looked around for weapons, but all they had were some small pocket knives and a hatchet. It was no match for whatever was out there in the woods. Suddenly, a group of creatures appeared out of nowhere, surrounding them on all sides. They were small, about the size of a large dog, with matted fur and razor-sharp teeth. They growled and snarled, showing their teeth as they closed in on the group. The group backed up, trying to stay away from the creatures, but they were quickly surrounded. They could feel their hot breath on their skin, and they knew that they were in grave danger. Just as it seemed like the creatures were going to attack, the sun began to rise over the trees. The creatures suddenly retreated, disappearing into the woods as quickly as they had appeared. The group was shaken but relieved that they had survived the night. They knew that they had to leave the woods as soon as possible before anything else happened to them. They quickly packed up their belongings and began to make their way back the way they had come, using the sun as their guide. They walked for what felt like hours until they finally stumbled onto a familiar trail. They knew that they were going to make it out of the woods alive. As they walked, they noticed that the woods around them had changed. The trees were taller and older, and the underbrush was thicker than they remembered. It was as if they had walked into a different part of the woods altogether. After a few hours of hiking, they saw a cabin in the distance. They were relieved to see a sign of civilization and quickened their pace towards it. As they got closer, they noticed that the cabin looked abandoned, with broken windows and a rusted metal door. They hesitated, unsure if it was safe to approach the cabin. But as they looked around, they realized that they had no other options. They were exhausted, running low on food and water, and needed a place to rest. They cautiously approached the cabin, ready to defend themselves if necessary. As they got closer, they noticed a strange smell emanating from the cabin. It was a sickly sweet odor that made their stomachs churn. They cautiously pushed open the door and stepped inside. The inside of the cabin was in disarray, with furniture overturned and papers scattered everywhere. The smell was even stronger inside, and they realized that it was coming from a room at the back of the cabin. They cautiously made their way towards the room, their hearts pounding with fear. As they pushed open the door, they saw something that made them scream in terror. There, in the middle of the room, was a body. It was badly decomposed, with maggots crawling all over it. The smell was unbearable, and the group had to cover their noses and mouths to avoid vomiting. They quickly realized that they had stumbled upon a crime scene. The body had been there for weeks, maybe even months, and no one had discovered it until now. They knew that they had to get out of there and report it to the authorities. As they turned to leave the room, they heard a creaking sound behind them. They turned around and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, dressed in tattered clothes and holding a bloody axe. The man stared at them with wild eyes, a manic grin on his face. He lunged towards them, swinging the axe with all his might. "Run!" Rachel screamed, pushing her friends out of the way as the man swung the axe at them. They stumbled out of the room, their hearts pounding with fear. They could hear the man's heavy footsteps behind them as they ran through the cabin. They desperately searched for a way out, but all the windows were boarded up, and the front door was too far away. They reached a dead end in the cabin, with the man quickly closing in on them. They huddled together, ready to fight back with whatever they had. As the man approached them, swinging the blood-stained axe, Rachel desperately searched for something, anything, to defend herself and her friends. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon or a means of escape, but she found nothing. The only thing they had was their wits and their sheer determination to survive. "Stand back," Rachel shouted, hoping to intimidate the man, but he didn't seem to be deterred. He continued to advance on them, his eyes wide and filled with a manic fury. Suddenly, Rachel remembered the spray bottle of bug repellent in her backpack. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. She quickly dug through her bag and pulled out the bottle. "Get ready," she shouted to her friends, who stood behind her, their eyes wide with fear. The man was almost upon them, his axe raised high above his head. Rachel waited until he was within range and then aimed the spray bottle at his face. She pulled the trigger, and a stream of bug repellent shot out, hitting the man square in the face. The man recoiled, his hands flying to his face as he screamed in agony. Rachel seized the opportunity and grabbed the axe from his grasp. She quickly swung it around, hitting the man in the head with the blunt end. The man fell to the ground, unconscious, and Rachel's friends breathed a collective sigh of relief. They quickly checked the man's pockets for any identification or clues as to why he was in the cabin, but they found nothing except for a few coins and a piece of crumpled paper. Rachel unfolded the paper and saw that it was a map of the surrounding area. She quickly realized that the man was not alone and that there was likely a group of people who were responsible for the crime scene they had stumbled upon. Rachel's heart sank as she realized what they were up against. They had stumbled upon a group of dangerous criminals who were capable of committing unspeakable acts. She knew they had to leave the cabin immediately and get as far away as possible. As they huddled together, catching their breath and discussing their next move, they heard the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. Rachel's heart sank as she realized that they were not alone. She motioned for her friends to be quiet and still, hoping that whoever was outside wouldn't hear them. But it was too late. The door burst open, and a group of men stormed into the cabin. They were rough-looking, dressed in ragged clothes, and armed with various weapons. Rachel and her friends stood frozen, realizing that they were outnumbered and outmatched. The men looked at them with cold, calculating eyes, and Rachel knew that they were in serious trouble. "What are you doing here?" one of the men growled, his voice deep and menacing. "We were just passing through," Rachel stammered, hoping to appeal to their sense of reason. But the men didn't seem interested in listening. "We don't take kindly to trespassers," another man said, brandishing a knife. Rachel knew that they had to act fast. She motioned to her friends to run, hoping that they could outrun the men and find help. But as they turned to flee, one of the men lunged forward, plunging his knife into Jess. The group screamed in horror as they watched their friend fall to the ground, blood pooling around him. Rachel felt a surge of rage and despair, realizing that they were all going to die if they didn't fight back. She grabbed the axe, still stained with the man's blood, and swung it at one of the attackers. The man fell to the ground, writhing in pain as Rachel's friends joined in the fight. The scene was chaotic, with bodies flying everywhere and the sound of clashing metal and screaming. Rachel fought with all her might, fueled by a fierce determination to survive and avenge her fallen friend. But it was too late. The men were too strong and too numerous, and one by one, Rachel's friends fell to their attacks. Rachel felt a searing pain as she was stabbed in the chest, her vision growing dark as she fell to the ground. As she lay dying, she felt a sense of peace and acceptance wash over her. She had fought bravely, and she had given her all to protect her friends. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Rachel closed her eyes, her breathing growing shallow as she slipped away. She knew that her friends would never forget her, and that her memory would live on in their hearts. As the last of her strength faded away, Rachel whispered a final goodbye to her friends, hoping that they would find a way to survive and make it out of the cabin alive. And with that, she slipped away, her body growing still and cold, her spirit rising up to the heavens. The The remaining two friends, Alex and Tyler, still in shock from Rachel's sudden death, huddled together in the corner of the room. They knew that they couldn't stay in the cabin any longer, but they were too scared to move. After a few moments, they realized that they had to get out of there. They had to honor Rachel's memory by making it out alive and reporting the crime to the authorities. They slowly got to their feet, their bodies trembling with fear. They carefully stepped over Rachel's body and made their way towards the door. As they approached the exit, they heard a noise coming from outside. It was a car engine, and it was getting closer by the second. They quickly realized that they were not alone, and whoever was driving the car was likely connected to the crime they had stumbled upon. They knew that they had to act fast. They quickly scanned the room for any weapons or means of defense, and their eyes fell upon the bloody axe lying on the ground. One of the friends picked up the axe, while the other grabbed a broken chair leg. They stood at the ready, waiting for whoever was outside to come in. The car pulled up outside, and the sound of the engine died down. The two friends held their breath as the car door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and muscular, with a menacing look in his eyes. He approached the cabin cautiously, his hand resting on a gun in his waistband. The two friends didn't wait for him to make the first move. They rushed towards him, swinging their makeshift weapons with all their might. The man was taken by surprise, and he stumbled back, his gun falling to the ground. The friends continued to swing their weapons, not stopping until the man lay motionless on the ground. They quickly grabbed the man's gun and made their way out of the cabin. They ran towards the car, hoping to make their escape before anyone else arrived. They drove for hours, their minds numb with shock and fear. When they finally reached civilization, they immediately went to the police station and reported what they had seen. The police investigated the crime scene and were able to identify the body as that of a local man who had gone missing several months ago. They also found evidence connecting him to a group of criminals who were involved in a string of robberies and murders in the area. Thanks to the bravery and quick thinking of Rachel's friends, the police were able to apprehend the rest of the group and bring them to justice. The two friends received commendations from the police for their actions and were hailed as heroes in the local community. But for Rachel's friends, the memory of that fateful day would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They would always remember the bravery of their friend who sacrificed herself to save them, and they would always wonder what might have been if they had found a way out of the cabin before it was too late. But they knew that they would never forget Rachel and the incredible courage she had shown in the face of unimaginable horror. If you enjoyed tonight's virtual nightmare, I hope the like and subscribe button haunt you tonight. Also, turn on all notifications to avoid being haunting. If you want to share your own virtual nightmare story, submit via Reddit or Instagram. Links will be in the description.